The blood on the floor of St. Hacken's South Ward didn't belong to a patient, and the woman standing over the body holding a scalpel with the precision of a surgeon and the cold eyes of a killer wasn't a doctor. For 3 years, the staff of St. Hacken thought Aaliyah West was just the quiet night nurse who changed IV bags and dodged eye contact. They thought she was timid. They thought she was weak. They were wrong. When a heavily armed man locked down the 5th floor with 20 hostages, he thought he was the hunter. He didn't know he had just locked himself in a cage with a ghost. This is the story of the night the predator became the prey. It was a Friday in December, when the storm started a cold, relentless blizzard, hammering against the glass facade of St. Hacken Memorial Hospital in New Jersey. Inside, on the 5th floor, trauma and post-op, the air smelled of floor wax and antiseptic. It was 2200 hours, the graveyard shift. Aaliyah West sat at the nurse's station, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in her dark, unblinking eyes. To the casual observer, Aaliyah was invisible. She was 34, her dark natural hair pulled back into a severe, fraying bun. She walked with a slight shuffle, shoulders hunched as if trying to occupy as little space in the world as possible. She spoke in a whisper. She never argued with the doctors. "She's a robot, I swear," whispered Brittany Cole, a 22-year-old nurse fresh out of college, scrolling through TikTok on her phone at the other end of the desk. I asked her what she did this weekend, and she said, "Laundry. Who does laundry for 48 hours? Dr. Richard Sterling, the lead trauma surgeon on call, didn't even look up from his charts. As long as she preps the meds correctly, Brittany, I don't care if she stares at a wall. Just keep her away from the families. She has the bedside manner of a wet mop." Sterling was brilliant, arrogant, and tired. He had just finished a 6-hour vascular repair on a gunshot victim from Newark and was running on caffeine and ego. He didn't notice things about people like Aaliyah. He didn't notice that while she shuffled her feet, she never made a sound. He didn't notice that when a tray dropped in the cafeteria 3 floors down, Aaliyah didn't jump. She shifted her weight to the balls of her feet, her eyes darting to the exits before anyone else registered the noise. He didn't notice the scar tissue running like a jagged road map from her collarbone down her right shoulder, hidden beneath her scrub top. Aaliyah typed her notes. Patient in 504 stable. Vitals normal. Drip replaced. She wasn't bored. She was vigilant. Old habits didn't die. They just went dormant. 7 years ago, Aaliyah West wasn't wiping brows. She was Staff Sergeant West, attached to a cultural support team, CST, working alongside the 75th Ranger Regiment in the Pesh Valley, Afghanistan. She had cleared compounds in total darkness. She had treated sucking chest wounds while taking fire from a ridgeline 300 meters away. She had left that life behind, or so she told herself. "Hey West," Brittany chirped, popping gum. "Can you take the trash down to the chute? It's creeping me out being near the elevator alone." Aaliyah looked up, her face blank. "Sure." She stood up. No wasted movement. She grabbed the heavy bags, her forearms flexing cords of muscle rippling unexpectedly under her deep brown skin before she slumped her shoulders again, hiding her strength. She walked down the long, dim hallway. The storm outside was picking up, wind rattling the windows. As she reached the utility room near the elevator bank, she heard it. It wasn't a sound that belonged in a hospital. It wasn't a gurney wheel squeaking or a pager beeping. It was the metallic clack slide of a bolt carrier group being sent home on a rifle. Aaliyah froze. The shuffle vanished. Her spine straightened. Her chin dropped. She didn't breathe. Ding! The elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open. Aaliyah stepped backward into the shadows of the utility room, leaving the door cracked just an inch. Through the sliver of light, she watched. A man stepped out. He was big, 6'4", easily 250 pounds. He wore a heavy trench coat soaked in melted snow, heavy boots, and a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. But it was what he held in his hands that made Aaliyah's blood turn to ice, then immediately to fire. An AR-15 platform rifle, modified short barrel, holographic sight, This wasn't a gangbanger with a cheap piece. This was a man who knew his equipment. He didn't look crazy. He looked calm. Aaliyah watched as he walked past her hiding spot, heading straight for the nurse's station. He didn't rush. He moved with a heavy, purposeful gait. Aaliyah looked at her wrist. No Apple Watch. An old battered G-Shock. 2:14. She touched her pocket. Her phone was back at the desk. She was unarmed. She was in a dead-end utility room, and a wolf had just walked into the sheep pen. The silence of the ward was shattered, not by a scream, but by a voice that boomed like a thunderclap. Nobody move. From her vantage point in the dark utility room, Aaliyah saw the scene unfold down the corridor. Dr. Sterling dropped his chart. Brittany froze, her phone slipping from her hand and clattering onto the linoleum. The gunman, whose name the world would soon learn was Victor Draven, kicked the locking mechanism of the double doors leading to the waiting room, jamming a rubber wedge under them. He had just sealed the floor. "Hands on the desk now," Draven roared, raising the rifle. Brittany screamed, a high-pitched, terrifying sound. "Please, I don't." Bam! Draven didn't shoot her. He fired a single round into the ceiling. The sound in the confined hallway was deafening. Dust and ceiling tiles rained down on the pristine floor. The echo slammed against the walls, disorienting everyone. "Next one goes in a kneecap!" Draven yelled. "Where is he? Where is Sterling?" Dr. Sterling, usually the god of his domain, was trembling. He raised his hand slowly, his face the color of ash. I'm Dr. Sterling." Draven turned the weapon toward the surgeon. "You remember me, doctor? You remember Sophie Draven 3 years ago? Table 4. You said it was a routine bypass. You said she'd be home for Christmas." Sterling stammered, his eyes wide. I operate on thousands of people. I don't." "You killed her!" Draven screamed, the calm facade cracking to reveal a jagged edge of grief and rage. "You were drunk." The nurses whispered about it. "I spent 3 years finding the proof. And tonight we're going to have a trial, doctor." Draven swung the rifle back to Brittany. "You! Get the patients out of the rooms. Everyone in the hallway now. Anyone who can't walk, you drag them." Aaliyah, still in the utility room, felt her heart rate spike, not from fear, but from the adrenaline dump. Tachypnea set in. Time seemed to slow down. She assessed the threat. Target: male, heavy build. Weapon: AR-15, likely semi-auto, 30-round mag. He has a sidearm on his hip. Looks like a 1911. Hostiles: 1 visible. Friendlies: 2 staff visible. Roughly 12 patients in the wing. Environment: confined space. Hard cover, limited to the nurse's desk. She needed to move. If she stayed in the closet, she was useless. If she charged him now from 50 feet away with 0 cover, she was dead. She needed to become part of the scene. She needed to get close. Aaliyah took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a split second, and flipped the switch. Staff Sergeant West receded. Timorous Nurse Aaliyah came forward. She pushed the utility door open and stumbled out, dropping the trash bags loudly. Draven spun around, the rifle snapping toward her. "Freeze!" Aaliyah threw her hands up, trembling violently. She hunched her shoulders, making herself look smaller. Pathetic. She let her mouth hang open in terrified shock. "D, don't shoot!" she wailed, her voice cracking. "Please, I'm just the nurse. I was just taking out the trash." Draven eyed her. He saw the fraying scrubs, the messy hair, the absolute terror in her posture. He saw prey. He didn't see the way her eyes were scanning the magwell of his rifle to see if the safety was on. It wasn't. He didn't see her gauging the distance between him and the scalpel tray on the crash cart. "Get over here," Draven barked, gesturing with the barrel. "Move!" Aaliyah scrambled forward, tripping over her own feet, a calculated move to lower his guard. She joined Brittany and Sterling at the desk. Brittany was sobbing uncontrollably. Aaliyah grabbed Brittany's hand, squeezing it hard. "It's okay," Aaliyah whispered, her voice shaking for show, but her grip like a vice. "Just breathe." "Shut up!" Draven yelled. He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a bundle of heavy-duty zip ties. He threw them at Aaliyah. "You, the quiet one," Draven sneered at Aaliyah. "Tie them up, hands behind their backs. If you leave them loose, I kill the girl first." Aaliyah picked up the zip ties. Her hands were steady until she noticed him watching. Then she forced them to shake. This was a mistake. He was giving her freedom of movement. He was letting the wolf walk among the sheep because he thought she was a dog. As Aaliyah moved behind Dr. Sterling to bind his wrists, she leaned in close to his ear. "Doctor," she whispered, so low only he could hear, her voice suddenly devoid of any fear, stripped of any stutter. It was a voice of pure, cold command. "When the lights go out, drop to the floor and cover your head. Do not move until I say clear." Sterling turned his head, slight confusion warring with terror in his eyes. "What?" "Tighten your muscles," she ordered, cinching the zip tie. She left it just loose enough that he could torque his wrists, but tight enough to look secure. She moved to Brittany. "Brittany," she whispered, "I need you to be brave. Can you do that?" "I'm going to die," Brittany sobbed. "No, you're not," Aaliyah said. She secured Brittany's wrists. "Because I'm here." "Hey, less talking." Draven racked the slide of his pistol to make a point. Aaliyah stood up and turned to face the gunman. She was 5 feet away from him. He towered over her. "They're tied," Aaliyah whimpered, clasping her hands in front of her chest, a submissive pose that also kept her hands ready near her center line. "Good," Draven said. He looked at the clock. 2:25. "Now, we wait for the police and the cameras." He turned his back to her for a fraction of a second to check the window. Aaliyah's eyes shifted to the master power breaker panel located just behind the nurse's station desk. It was 20 feet away, too far. She needed a weapon. Her eyes landed on the desk. A pen? A stapler? A pair of trauma shears? Draven turned back around. "You go check on the patients. Bring them out here. If anyone tries to run, I start shooting the doctor." Aaliyah nodded frantically. "Oh, okay. I'll go." She turned and walked down the hall toward the patient rooms. As soon as she broke the line of sight around the corner, the shuffle vanished again. She moved with lethal speed. She ducked into room 502. Mrs. Higgins, an 80-year-old with a hip fracture, was waking up, confused by the noise. "Shh, Mrs. Higgins," Aaliyah said softly. She moved to the bedside table. She wasn't looking for medicine. She was looking for chemistry. She grabbed a bottle of rubbing alcohol, isopropyl. She grabbed a lighter from Mrs. Higgins' purse. The woman was a secret smoker. She grabbed a handful of gauze pads. She looked at the ceiling, the fire suppression system. If she triggered the sprinklers, the chaos would be absolute, but the water would make the floor slick, bad for footing. She had a better idea. She moved to the supply closet at the end of the hall. She found what she needed: a portable oxygen tank and a defibrillator unit. Aaliyah West checked the charge on the defibrillator full. She ripped the sleeves off her scrub top, tying the fabric tight around her knuckles to protect them. She took a deep breath. The Ranger creed echoed in the back of her mind. "I will never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy." She stepped back out into the hallway. "Hey!" Draven shouted from the station. "What's taking so long?" Aaliyah walked back toward the light. But she wasn't hunched over anymore. She was walking tall. In her right hand, hidden behind her leg, she held the trauma shears she had swiped from a cart in the hall. In her left, she gripped a glass vial of succinylcholine, a paralytic agent. "I had to help Mrs. Higgins," Aaliyah called out. Her voice was different now. It carried. It was steady. Draven squinted. He sensed the shift. The air in the room changed. The prey wasn't acting like prey anymore. "Stop right there!" Draven raised the rifle. Aaliyah stopped. She was 10 meters away. "You look different," Draven said, narrowing his eyes. "It's the lighting," Aaliyah said flatly. "Get on your knees," Draven commanded. Aaliyah looked him dead in the eye. No. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. Sterling gasped. Brittany stopped crying, staring at Aaliyah in disbelief. "What did you say to me?" Draven whispered. Stepping forward, the rifle aimed at her chest. "I said no," Aaliyah repeated. She shifted her weight. "And you should have checked the back exit." Victor Draven flinched, his head jerking instinctively toward the hallway behind him. It was a lie. There was no back exit unlocked, but the distraction bought her 0.5 seconds. Aaliyah moved. The human eye takes roughly 150 milliseconds to process a visual stimuli, and another 100 milliseconds to send a motor signal to the muscles. In the world of close-quarters battle, a quarter of a second is an eternity. It is the difference between life and a folded flag. When Victor Draven turned his head to check the imaginary back exit, he gave Aaliyah that quarter second. She didn't run. Running triggers the predator reflex to chase. Instead, she exploded forward in a low crouch, covering the 10 meters between them with terrifying speed. She wasn't moving like a nurse. She was moving like a projectile. Draven realized the ruse instantly. His head snapped back, his finger tightening on the trigger of the AR-15. Crack! A round went off, but his aim was high. The bullet shattered the fluorescent light fixture above Aaliyah's head, showering the hallway in sparks and glass. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She slid on her knees for the last meter, coming in under the barrel of the rifle. She didn't go for his face. She went for the weapon. Her left hand, still gripping the glass vial of succinylcholine, smashed upward against the handguard of the rifle, forcing the muzzle toward the ceiling. Simultaneously, her right hand holding the trauma shears drove downward. She wasn't trying to stab him, the trench coat was too thick. She jammed the shears into the ejection port of the rifle, twisting violently. Metal screeched against metal. The bolt carrier group jammed. The rifle was now a 10 lb club. Draven roared, a sound of pure animal rage. He released the rifle with one hand and backhanded Aaliyah across the face. The blow was heavy. It lifted her off the floor and sent her skidding across the wax tiles. She tasted copper. Her vision blurred for a microsecond. "You B-times-ch!" Draven screamed. He racked the charging handle, but the shears were wedged deep. The gun was dead. He dropped the rifle and reached for the 1911 pistol on his hip. Aaliyah shook the cobwebs from her head. She was on the floor 5 feet away. She couldn't beat him to the draw. She looked at Sterling and Brittany, who were frozen in horror. "Run!" Aaliyah screamed, her voice cutting through the ringing in their ears. "Get to the stairwell!" The command broke their paralysis. Sterling grabbed Brittany by the arm, dragging her toward the fire exit. Draven pulled the pistol. He leveled it at the fleeing doctor. Aaliyah grabbed the nearest object, a heavy-wheeled IV stand, and shoved it with all her strength. It rolled into Draven's legs just as he fired. Bang! The shot went wide, burying itself in the drywall next to Brittany's head. They burst through the stairwell doors, disappearing into the concrete safety of the escape route. Now it was just Aaliyah and Draven. Draven turned his attention back to her. His eyes were maniacal. He raised the pistol. Aaliyah rolled. Bang! Bang! 2 rounds chewed up the floor tiles where she had been a second ago. She scrambled behind the nurse's station desk, putting the heavy laminate counter between her and the bullets. "I see you," Draven yelled, walking slowly toward the desk. "You think you're a hero? You're just a dead nurse." Aaliyah pressed her back against the inner wall of the desk. She checked her body. No holes, just a swelling jaw and bruised ribs. She looked at the counter above her. He was coming around the left side. She needed to change the environment. She needed darkness. She looked at the computer terminal on the desk. The uninterruptible power supply, US battery backup, was sitting on the floor. Heavy lead acid. She could hear his boots crunching on the broken glass. Crunch. Crunch. He was 6 feet away. Aaliyah ripped the power cord of the UPS from the wall. She grabbed the unit, counting the footsteps. Crunch. 4 feet. Crunch. 2 feet. Aaliyah stood up, not away from him, but into him. As Draven rounded the corner of the desk, expecting her to be cowering on the floor, he found her standing. Before he could raise the pistol, she swung the UPS unit like a medieval flail. It connected with his wrist. There was a sickening crack of bone. Draven screamed and dropped the pistol. It skittered across the floor, sliding under a locked medicine cabinet. He was disarmed, but he was huge, and he was enraged. He didn't need a gun to kill her. He lunged, tackling her. They crashed into the wall behind the desk. The impact knocked the wind out of Aaliyah. Draven's hands, the size of hams, found her throat. He squeezed. Aaliyah's vision began to tunnel. Black spots danced in her eyes. She clawed at his face, but he didn't flinch. He was running on pure adrenaline and psychosis. "Die!" he spat, spittle flying onto her face. Aaliyah couldn't breathe. Her trachea was compressing. Panic, the lizard brain reaction, tried to take over. Flail, kick, die. No. Aaliyah forced her mind to focus. Technical, anatomical, target, anterior neck. Objective, break the hold. Method, vagus nerve stimulation or ocular pressure. She stopped clawing at his face. She brought her thumbs to the inside of his elbows, digging into the tender nerve clusters. He grunted but held on. She needed more. She brought her knees up to her chest, wedging them between her body and his. With a guttural cry, she extended her legs, driving her heels into his solar plexus. The force of the kick broke his grip. Draven stumbled back, gasping for air. Aaliyah dropped to the floor, gasping. Her throat burned like fire. She looked at the pistol under the cabinet. Too far. She looked at Draven. He was recovering, shaking his head, his eyes fixing on her with renewed hatred. He pulled a combat knife from his boot, an 8-inch serrated blade. "Okay," Draven wheezed, grinning through the pain. "Now it's fun." Aaliyah scrambled backward, kicking open the door to the supply room behind the desk. She threw herself inside and slammed the door, locking the deadbolt just as Draven's body slammed against it. Thud! "Open it!" Draven screamed, slashing at the wood. "I'm going to carve you up!" Aaliyah backed away from the door. She was trapped in a 10x10 supply room. No windows, one door. But she wasn't trapped. She was in the armory. This was a medical supply room. To a civilian, it was bandages and saline. To a ranger, it was a core of chemical and biological weapons. Aaliyah looked around. Her breathing slowed. The fear evaporated, replaced by cold, calculating resolve. "You want to play in the dark?" she whispered to herself. She reached up and smashed the light bulb with the handle of a mop. The room plunged into pitch blackness. She moved to the shelves, her hands guided by muscle memory and 3 years of stocking these shelves. She found what she needed: ethanol, ammonia, bleach, a pressurized canister of freezing spray, ethyl chloride. She heard Draven outside. He was shooting the lock off the door with the rifle he had unjammed. Blam! Blam! The wood splintered. The door kicked open. Draven stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hallway lights. He couldn't see into the black void of the supply room. "Come out, little nurse!" he taunted, stepping into the darkness. Aaliyah was gone. She had climbed the shelving unit and was pressed against the ceiling, silent as a spider. The hunt was on. Outside St. Hacken's hospital, the world had turned into a kaleidoscope of red and blue lights. SWAT teams from the New Jersey State Police had established a perimeter. Armored bearcats idled on the snowy pavement. Snipers were positioning themselves on the rooftops of adjacent buildings, battling the driving snow to get a sightline into the 5th floor. Captain Rossi, the incident commander, stood by the hood of his cruiser, looking at the blueprints of the hospital. "Status!" he barked into his radio. "We have 2 hostages released," a voice crackled back. "Dr. Sterling and a nurse, Brittany Cole. They exited via the south stairwell." "Get them to the command post now," Rossi ordered. 5 minutes later, a trembling Brittany and a shell-shocked Dr. Sterling were wrapped in blankets, standing under the awning of the command tent. "Tell me what's happening up there," Rossi said, his voice urgent. "How many shooters?" "1," Sterling said, his voice raspy. Big guy, heavy weapons. Who is still in there? Patience, Brittany sobbed. And Aaliyah. Aaliyah? Rossi asked. Another nurse? Yeah, Sterling said, wiping snow from his face. But she's not just a nurse. Rossi frowned. What do you mean? Sterling looked at the police captain, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and awe. She took him apart. She jammed his rifle with a pair of scissors. She hit him with a battery backup, the way she moved. Captain, I've seen soldiers before. Aaliyah isn't a nurse. She's a war machine. Rossi turned to his aide. Run the name, Aaliyah West. I want to know who is in that building. The aide typed furiously on a laptop. A moment later, he stopped. He looked up, his face pale. Captain, the aide said, you're going to want to see this. Rossi looked at the screen. Name, West, Aaliyah. Rank, Staff Sergeant, Ret. Unit, 75th Ranger Regiment. Cultural Support Team. Decorations, Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts. Notes, Honorable Discharge, following IED injury in Kandahar. Specializations include SAR Survival, Evasion, Resistance and Escape. Level C, Combat Medic, Close Quarters Battle. Rossi stared at the screen. He looked back up at the 5th floor where the lights were flickering. God help that gunman, Rossi muttered. Stand down the entry team. We don't want to get in her way. The darkness was Aaliyah's ally. She had lived in the dark for months at a time, in the mountains of the Hindu Kush. She knew how sound traveled in it. She knew how fear tasted in it. Draven moved slowly into the room, leading with his knife. He was breathing heavy, a loud rasping sound that gave away his position every second. I know you're in here, he hissed. Aaliyah hung from the top shelf of the metal rack, her legs wrapped around the uprights. She was directly above him. In her hand, she held a makeshift weapon, a 500 milliliters glass bottle of ether wrapped in a towel. She waited. Draven took another step. He was directly below her. Aaliyah released her hold on the shelf with her legs and dropped. She didn't land on him. She landed behind him, silent as a cat. Draven spun around, slashing the air with his knife. Aaliyah ducked the blade, feeling the wind of it pass over her ear. She stepped in, jamming the towel-wrapped bottle of ether into his face. She smashed the glass against his nose. The bottle shattered. The liquid soaked the towel in his face. The fumes were instant and overpowering. Draven gagged, flailing. He slashed blindly with the knife, catching Aaliyah's scrub top, slicing a thin line across her stomach. She ignored the pain. She held the towel over his face, riding his back as he thrashed like a bull. Breathe deep, she whispered in his ear. Draven's knees buckled. The ether was entering his bloodstream, depressing his central nervous system. His movements became sluggish. The knife dropped from his hand. He fell to his knees, then to his face. Aaliyah rolled off him, gasping for fresh air. The fumes were making her dizzy, too. She scrambled to the door, kicking it open to let the hallway light and air in. She looked back at Draven. He was unconscious, a heap of wet trench coat and muscle on the floor. It was over, or so she thought. As Aaliyah leaned against the doorframe, trying to catch her breath, the hospital's PA system crackled to life. Code black. Code black. Fire in the South Ward. Aaliyah froze. Fire. She looked down the hall. Smoke was billowing from room 502, Mrs. Higgins' room. Draven must have set a charge or knocked over something flammable before he came for her. The fire alarm began to blare. The sprinklers kicked on, drenching the hallway in a deluge of gray water. Aaliyah looked at Draven. He was out cold. She could leave him. She could run. But the patients were still in their rooms. And then she saw it. Draven's hand moved. He wasn't out. He was faking. Or he had a tolerance that defied medical science. Draven roared, pushing himself up from the chemical puddle. His face was red, his eyes bloodshot and streaming tears. But he was alive, and he was holding a detonator. If I go, Draven coughed, blood and ether dripping from his face. Everyone goes. He held up a small black device. C4, he rasped. In the oxygen storage. The oxygen storage room. If that went up, it wouldn't just be a fire. It would be a crater. It would take out the entire south side of the hospital. Aaliyah looked at the detonator. She looked at the distance between them, 10 feet. She looked at her own hands, empty. Drop it, Aaliyah said. No, Draven smiled, a gruesome, broken expression. I want to see the sky fall. He moved his thumb toward the button. Aaliyah didn't think. She didn't plan. She reacted. She grabbed the only thing left on her person, the pen in her pocket, a standard-issue cheap plastic ballpoint pen. She threw it. It wasn't a throwing knife. It shouldn't have worked. But Aaliyah West had spent hours throwing rocks at tin cans in the boredom of the desert. The pen tumbled through the air and struck Draven directly in the eye he hadn't rubbed the ether out of. It didn't kill him, but the shock of a foreign object hitting his eyeball made him flinch. His hand jerked. The detonator flew from his grip, sliding across the wet floor toward the elevator shaft. No! Draven screamed. He dove for it. Aaliyah dove for him. They collided in the wet, smoky hallway, rolling over broken glass and water. It wasn't tactical anymore. It was a brawl. Draven punched her in the ribs. She felt something crack. Aaliyah headbutted him, her forehead smashing into his broken nose. He screamed, blinded by pain. Aaliyah scrambled on top of him. She trapped his arm. She wrapped her legs around his neck in a triangle choke. She squeezed. Go to sleep, she gritted out, her face contorted with effort. Go to sleep, Draven thrashed. He clawed at her legs. He tried to stand up, lifting her off the ground with him. But Aaliyah West was an army ranger. She held on. She squeezed until her own muscles screamed. Draven's struggles slowed. His arm went limp. His head lolled back. Aaliyah held it for another 10 seconds, just to be sure. Then she let go. Draven dropped to the floor, motionless. Aaliyah lay next to him, staring up at the sprinklers raining down on them. She was bleeding, bruised, and exhausted. She closed her eyes. Clear, she whispered to the empty hall. But the night wasn't over. The fire in room 502 was growing. The smoke was getting thicker, and she had 12 patients who couldn't walk. Aaliyah West stood up. She wiped the blood from her mouth. She grabbed Draven's ankles and dragged him into the supply room, locking the door from the outside with a zip tie she found on the floor. Then she turned toward the fire. Time to go to work, she said. The silence that followed the fight was short-lived. It was replaced by a sound far more terrifying than a gunshot. The roar of a fire finding its breath. The sprinklers were hissing, coating everything in a cold gray mist, but they were losing the battle. Room 502 wasn't just burning. It was an accelerant-fueled furnace. The black smoke billowed out into the corridor, rolling along the ceiling like an inverted ocean. It was thick, oily, and acrid, the smell of melting plastic and burning linen. Aaliyah coughed, the taste of soot mixing with the copper taste of blood in her mouth. She forced herself to stand. Her ribs screamed in protest, likely 2 fractures from Draven's boots. Her stomach burned from the knife graze. Her head swam from the ether fumes. But the Ranger switch was still flipped on. Pain is information. Information is actionable. Ignore the pain. Act on the objective. Objective 1. Contain the blast threat. Objective 2. Evacuate the non-ambulatory. Aaliyah limped toward the oxygen storage room. It was adjacent to room 502. The wall, separating them, was already hot to the touch. Inside that room were 20 tanks of compressed oxygen. If the heat compromised the structural integrity of those tanks, or if the fire reached the C4 Draven had planted, St. Hacken's wouldn't just have a fire. It would have a hole in its side the size of a city block. She tried the handle of the oxygen room locked. She looked through the small reinforced window. She saw the brick of C4 taped to the main manifold. It wasn't wired to a timer. Draven had lied, or rather the detonator she had kicked away was the only trigger. C4 is remarkably stable. You can shoot it or burn it, and it usually won't explode without a shock wave from a blasting cap. Usually. But the oxygen tanks were the real problem. If they ruptured from the heat, the pressure release would be catastrophic. Aaliyah grabbed a stack of towels from a linen cart. She soaked them in the water pooling on the floor. She wedged them tightly into the crack under the oxygen room door, creating a seal to keep the superheated smoke out and insulate the room for a few more precious minutes. It was a band-aid on a bullet wound, but it bought time. She turned her attention to room 502. Mrs. Higgins. The door to 502 was open, vomiting black smoke. The heat coming out of it was blistering. Aaliyah took a breath of the relatively cleaner air near the floor, pulled the collar of her scrub top over her nose, and crawled in. Visibility was zero. The heat was oppressive, searing her skin. The orange glow of flames licked the curtains and the ceiling tiles. "Mrs. Higgins!" Aaliyah shouted into the roar. A weak cough answered her from the far side of the bed. Aaliyah crawled on her elbows and knees, keeping below the thermal layer. She found the bed. It was empty. Mrs. Higgins had tried to get out and fallen. Aaliyah's hand brushed against soft fabric, a nightgown. "I've got you," Aaliyah grunted. She grabbed the elderly woman's wrist. Mrs. Higgins was dead weight, terrified, and semi-conscious from smoke inhalation. "My hip," Mrs. Higgins moaned. "I know. I'm sorry. This is going to hurt," Aaliyah said. There was no time for gentleness. Aaliyah grabbed Mrs. Higgins by the back of her nightgown and dragged her across the floor. The heat was melting the soles of Aaliyah's shoes. Her skin felt tight, like it was shrinking. They reached the hallway. Aaliyah heaved Mrs. Higgins out into the wet, misty corridor just as the ceiling tiles in room 502 collapsed in a shower of sparks. Aaliyah rolled onto her back, gasping for air. The hallway air was bad, but compared to the room, it was sweet. She checked Mrs. Higgins' breathing. Pulse rapid, burns on her arms. "Stay down," Aaliyah ordered. She looked down the hall. The smoke layer was banking down, getting lower. In 5 minutes, the entire floor would be a kill box. There were one other rooms, 11 other patients. Some were post-op knees. Some were appendectomies. One was a car crash survivor in traction. Aaliyah West stood up. She was alone. The fire department was minutes away. But minutes were a currency she didn't have. She needed a force multiplier. She ran to the nurse's station, grabbing the master keyring from the drawer. She unlocked the supply closet where she had stashed the unconscious Draven. He was still out, breathing shallowly. She didn't look at him. She grabbed a pair of trauma shears and cut the zip ties on his ankles. She grabbed his heavy trench coat. She ran back to the hallway. She went to room 505. Mr. Russo, a 250-pounds man with a total knee replacement. "Nurse," he croaked, sitting up in bed, eyes wide with terror as smoke curled under his door. "Get up," Aaliyah said. "I can't walk my knee." "I didn't ask you to walk," Aaliyah said. She threw the heavy trench coat onto the floor. "Get on the coat." "What?" "Get on the coat!" Aaliyah roared, her voice carrying the terrifying authority of a drill sergeant. Mr. Russo scrambled out of bed, adrenaline overriding his pain, and flopped onto the trench coat. Aaliyah grabbed the collar of the coat. It made a perfect sled. The wax floors, slick with water from the sprinklers, reduced the friction. She dug her heels in and pulled. Mr. Russo slid into the hallway. "Hold Mrs. Higgins' hand," Aaliyah commanded, parking him next to the old woman. "Do not let go." She went to the next room, and the next. She was moving like a machine now. Breach. Secure. Extract. She used bed sheets. She used wheelchairs. She linked them together in the center of the hallway, away from the burning walls. The fire had breached the hallway ceiling now. Flaming debris dropped like rain. The heat was becoming unbearable. Aaliyah had 10 patients in the train. 2 were missing. Room 510 Timothy, a young boy recovering from a ruptured spleen. Room 512, a comatose patient on a ventilator. The path to 510 was blocked by a wall of fire. The ceiling had partially collapsed. Aaliyah looked at the fire. She looked at the water soaking her scrubs. She ran to the janitor's cart. She grabbed a bucket of water and dumped it over her own head. Then she took a deep breath, lowered her head, and ran straight through the wall of fire. Captain Rossi, of the New Jersey SWAT team, stood at the base of the stairwell on the ground floor. The blueprints were useless now. The radio reports were chaotic. "Fire Command says the 5th floor is fully involved," a sergeant yelled over the sirens. "They can't get the ladder truck close enough because of the wind and the overhang." "We have to go up," Rossi said. "We have hostages, Captain. It's an oven up there. We have no visibility. If we go in, we might not come out." Rossi gritted his teeth. "We go. Alpha, team on me. Breaching charges, gas masks on." The SWAT team moved up the stairwell, a column of black-clad warriors. They reached the 5th floor landing. The door was hot. Smoke was seeping through the jambs. Rossi signaled, "Breach." They hit the door with a ram. It flew open. A wall of black smoke hit them, followed by intense heat. "Clear left, clear right." They moved into the haze, their weapon lights cutting beams through the gloom. "Police! Call out!" Rossi shouted. Silence. Just the roar of the fire and the hiss of sprinklers. They moved multiple meters. "Captain, look," the point man said. His voice hushed. Through the swirling smoke, a shape emerged. It looked like a centipede. It was a chain of humans. Patients on sheets, patients in wheelchairs, patients dragging each other. They were huddled low to the ground in the center of the hall, covered in wet blankets. "Get them out! Go! Go!" Rossi ordered. The SWAT officers slung their rifles and began grabbing patients, hauling them toward the stairwell. "Where is the nurse?" Rossi asked Mr. Russo as he dragged the big man to safety. "She went back," Russo coughed, pointing into the orange glow at the end of the hall. "She went back for the kid." Rossi looked down the hall. The ceiling was sagging. The structural integrity was failing. "West!" Rossi screamed. "West!" No answer. "Captain, we have to pull back. The roof is coming down," the sergeant yelled. Rossi hesitated. He knew the protocol. Never trade a life for a body. If she was in that inferno, she was gone. "Pull back," Rossi ordered. "Get these people out." The team retreated, the heavy fire door slamming shut behind them, sealing the 5th floor. Aaliyah wasn't dead, but she was close. She had made it to room 510. She found Timothy hiding under his bed, screaming. She dragged him out, shielding his body with hers as burning ceiling tiles rained down. She got him to the hallway, but the path back to the stairwell was blocked by the collapse that had forced SWAT back. She was cut off. She looked around. The heat was baking her eyes. Her skin was blistering. She had Timothy in her arms. He was light, maybe 60 pounds. "Hold on to my neck, Timothy," she rasped. "Don't let go." She couldn't go back. She couldn't go forward. She looked at the window in room 510. It was a solid pane of reinforced glass, non-opening. St. Hacken's was a suicide prevention facility as well. The windows were unbreakable. Aaliyah grabbed a heavy oxygen tank from the corner. She swung it at the window. It bounced off. She swung again. A spiderweb crack appeared. She swung a third time, screaming with the effort, putting every ounce of her remaining strength into the blow. Smash! The glass shattered. The wind from the storm outside rushed in, feeding the fire, creating a backdraft effect. The door to the room slammed shut from the pressure change. Aaliyah ran to the window. She looked down. 5 stories, 50 feet. Below, on the concrete, she saw the lights of the police cars. She saw the fire trucks. She saw the extended ladder of the fire truck. It was fully extended, but the wind was whipping it around. It was still 10 feet away from the window and 5 feet below. It was too far to jump, especially with a child. But the fire was eating the door. It was coming through the wood. Aaliyah climbed onto the sill. The snow lashed her face. "Timothy!" she yelled over the wind. "Do you trust me?" The boy was sobbing, buried in her neck. "No." "Good," Aaliyah said. "Trust gravity." She didn't jump for the ladder. She jumped for the drainage pipe running down the side of the building 3 feet to her left. She launched herself into the void. Her right hand caught the rusted iron pipe. The wet metal was slick. Her grip slipped. She fell. She clawed at the pipe, her fingernails tearing. Her left arm, clutching the boy, was useless for climbing. Her hand caught a bracket. It held. Her shoulder wrenched with a sickening pop, a dislocation. She hung there, 40 feet above the ground, dangling by one arm, the boy clinging to her chest. The fire roared out of the window she had just exited, a tongue of flame licking the air where she had stood seconds ago. "Hang on!" a voice shouted from below. The ladder truck was maneuvering. The firefighter in the bucket was extending his reach. "Grab my hand!" the firefighter screamed. He was still 4 feet away. Aaliyah looked at her arm. It was spasming. She was losing her grip. "Take him!" Aaliyah yelled. She swung her body, using her last reserve of momentum. She swung toward the ladder. "Timothy, reach!" The boy reached out. The firefighter lunged. He caught the boy's wrist. He pulled him into the bucket. Aaliyah swung back toward the pipe. Her hand slammed against the wet metal. She slipped. She fell. The crowd below gasped. A collective scream rose from the onlookers. Aaliyah fell 1 story, but she didn't hit the ground. As she passed the 4th-floor window, her boot caught on a heavy external air conditioning unit bracket. It spun her around, slamming her body against the brick wall. She grabbed the grate of the AC unit with her good hand. She hung there, battered, burned, dislocated shoulder, dangling, bleeding from a dozen cuts, suspended 30 feet in the air. The firefighter in the bucket lowered the controls rapidly. The bucket descended. "I got you! I got you!" the firefighter yelled, maneuvering the basket under her feet. Aaliyah let go. She collapsed into the basket, landing in a heap of wet scrubs and blood. The firefighter keyed his radio. "I have the child, and I have the woman. She's alive. Repeat, the Ranger is alive." As the bucket lowered to the ground, the crowd broke the police line. But it wasn't a mob. It was the staff. It was Dr. Sterling. It was Brittany. They ran toward the truck. When the basket touched the asphalt, Aaliyah tried to stand up. She failed. Sterling was there. He grabbed her uninjured side. "I got you, Aaliyah," Sterling said, tears streaming down his face. "I got you." Aaliyah looked at him. Her face was black with soot, her hair singed, her eyes haunted. "The count," she whispered. "What?" "The head count," she rasped. "Did we get them all?" Sterling looked at Captain Rossi, who had just run up. "We cleared the stairwell," Rossi said. 11 patients, plus the boy. "And you, Draven," Aaliyah whispered. "Supply closet. Zip ties." Rossi's eyes widened. "You got him out too." Aaliyah didn't answer. Her eyes rolled back in her head. Her knees buckled. She collapsed into Sterling's arms, the adrenaline finally ceding territory to the trauma. The ghost of the 5th floor had finally run out of fuel. The steady beep, beep, beep was the first thing Aaliyah heard. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the one monitoring the machine. She was the one attached to it. She opened her eyes to the sterile white of the ICU. Dr. Richard Sterling sat in a plastic chair by her bed, looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days. He wasn't wearing his white coat. "Welcome back, Sergeant," he whispered. "The patients," Aaliyah rasped, her throat raw from the smoke. "All of them," Sterling smiled, tears brimming in his eyes. "Every single one made it out. Even the kid. You threw him into a firefighter's arms from 40 feet up." Aaliyah nodded, relief washing over her battered body. She had 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and 2nd-degree burns across her back. Draven was currently in the prison ward at University Hospital, handcuffed to a bed with multiple fractures. He was done. "I read your file," Sterling said, his voice trembling. "For 3 years, I treated you like furniture. I snapped at you. I ignored you. I didn't know I was standing next to a giant. I just did my job, Aaliyah murmured. No, you did mine, Sterling countered. He leaned in, his expression haunted, draven. Before he went down, he screamed that I was drunk that night 3 years ago when his wife died. He looked at her, terrified of the answer. Was I, Aaliyah? I was in a dark place then. I don't remember. Aaliyah looked at the brilliant surgeon who had saved hundreds of lives. She remembered the smell of scotch on his breath that night. She remembered stepping in to steady his hand. But she also remembered that Sophie Draven had died of a massive embolism that no doctor, drunk or sober, could have stopped. You were tired, Richard, she lied, her voice steady and commanding. You were sober. You did everything right. Sterling slumped back, the crushing weight of 3 years lifting from his shoulders. She had saved his life in the fire, and now, with that one mercy, she had saved his soul. 3 weeks later, the press filled the hospital lobby, clamoring for the Angel of St. Hacken's. The mayor was there with a key to the city, but the podium remained empty. Up on the 5th floor, amidst the smell of fresh paint and drywall, Aaliyah West stood at the nurse's station. Brittany Cole, no longer glued to her phone, walked up and handed her a small box. We know you hate the spotlight, but the staff, we needed to do this. Inside was a new name badge. It didn't just say Aaliyah West, RN. It read, Aaliyah West, Ranger, Charge Nurse. Charge Nurse? Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. That means more paperwork. It means you run the show, Sterling said, stepping off the elevator. Though I think you always have. Aaliyah clipped the badge to her scrubs. She looked at her team, not just co-workers anymore, but a squad. She took a deep breath. The war was over, but the mission never ended. All right, Aaliyah said, her voice sharp. Show's over. Mrs. Higgins needs her meds. Let's get to work. She turned and walked down the hall, silent as a ghost, ready for the night watch. It makes you wonder, who are the quiet warriors in your life? Who is the person in your office, your school, or your hospital who seems invisible but might be holding the whole place together? If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps us find more incredible stories like this one. And if you want to be part of our squad, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We have a new story dropping next week about a deep-sea welder who found something in the Mariana Trench that the government tried to hide. You do not want to miss it.